All right, guys, thank you very much for making time today. I know you're all busy, so I appreciate it quite a bit. My name is Nick O'Neill. I'm the VP of Business Development here at Cooper Technologies. My email address is at the screen. It's nick@coopertech.net. At any time in the future, if you have any questions regarding Excel or any of the topics we covered today, please do not hesitate to contact me. I am more than happy to respond to any questions that may come. A little bit of reason why I am teaching a class on Excel. I lived in Japan for a significant portion of my life, about 10 years. And while I was living there, I had to adapt to how the Japanese people use and interact with the Microsoft product line. And in Japan, I'd say 90% of all documents are actually written and played with and formatted in Excel because of the way the language works. And because of that, I have an extensive experience in manipulating and playing with Excel. And from that, one of the things that Cooper Technologies really takes as a baseline for our business is looking for anybody who is associated with us as we look at any type of a partner. And what I mean by that is we want to make sure that you guys succeed in any way associated with technology. So because I have skills and knowledge in Excel, I thought it would be good to kind of pass on that to everybody who may be interested in learning about it. So we're going to go through a couple of really basic aspects of Excel. This is more of an entry-level kind of an explanation of how Excel works and the tricks and kind of little tips that can speed up your day-to-day interaction with the program. We're going to go through just the overview of the program. We're going to kind of touch base on some of the formulas. I'd like to show how to create charts and some of the newer features and the newer versions of Excel. And then if time allows, we'll talk about protecting forms and how you can create a form and for sharing inside of your organization and protect it so that any formulas you have inside of the Excel worksheet cannot be deleted and you just gather input that way. So if we can get through it all, that's great. If not, we will kind of see where we get to. At any point in this webinar, if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to put them into the chat column, and at points where there's a pause, Clayton will be kind enough to ask those questions of me, and I'll be sure to address them as a one-to-one basis. All of the files I have that are already presented today, I will share afterwards so that you can play with them as we move along. Thank you again for your time. So first off, I just want to give a couple of very quick navigation shortcuts in Excel. We'll talk about them really quickly as we move through and talk about how Excel works. But we're going to talk about how to edit a selected cell, entering the cell at the end of the contents, how to move to the next cell and move back. In effect, how to navigate around an Excel window without actually having to use the mouse much at all. If you're doing a lot of data entry, this definitely helps quite a bit. So with no further ado, I'm going to jump right into the Excel. So Excel obviously is a format that is often used for manipulating data. It is organized, as you are well aware, I am sure. When you open up the program, it will pop up with these letters at the top and numbers down the side. These correspond to the rows and columns of the sheet, and you can manipulate the rows and columns by selecting the rows and columns with the mouse. And when the arrow pointer changes to the black bar with the arrows to either side, you can format the width of the cells. And you can do the same thing with the height of the rows. Inside of the main navigation window here, I do want to do a little bit of housekeeping so that you're aware of the vocabulary I will be using when talking about Excel. At the top, you have, in versions 2013 and on, what is called the ribbon bar. The ribbon bar can be hidden. There is a little button on the side that will allow you to collapse the ribbon, is what they call it. And you can always get back to the ribbon by clicking on any one of these ribbon tabs, is what I will call them. So on the home tab on the ribbon bar, once you open it up, if you have collapsed it or want to get it back so that it's always in place, you can just click the little pin and it will pin it in place. And when you do that, you should be able to see your formula bar. There are many different types tabs here. We'll go through them really quickly. I'm not going to delve too much into what they are, but the tab allows you to have icon-based way to interact with and format the data inside of the Excel program. So the home page just gives you some basic text formatting, as well as location of the text in it, direction of the text, merging number formatting, and some advanced formatting tools that I will hopefully touch on today. The Insert tab obviously is for putting different types of objects into your Excel document. The most commonly used are the charts, and if we have time, we'll touch on some of the chart features here. You can also draw in Excel. It's not very commonly used, but you can. There is a tab for page layout, which allows you to set the orientation of your Excel worksheet, as well as the area that is going to be printed when you print from an Excel worksheet. We may touch on this if I have time. There's also a tab that is specifically for formulas. This does break down the formulas that are available in Excel into the different types of formulas that you can use in your worksheets. There's a tab on data, which allows you to manipulate the data once you have put it into. Today, we'll kind of focus quite a bit on some of the features on this tab later on. There's a review tab that allows you to run a spelling check on your document, use thesauruses, as well as protect the worksheet and the workbook, as well as allow certain editing features. And today, if we have time, I'd like to kind of touch on this as well. The last one is the view page. This allows your particular interaction with Excel to be customized to the way that you want to do it. Today, we really won't touch base on this unless there's a specific question on some of the features here. So getting back to the Home tab really quickly, I do want to talk a little bit about this section right here of your Excel worksheet area. This is the formula bar and the cell address, or the name box. The reason why these areas are important is if you are working with a very large Excel document, you can always find out what cell you're working with by tracing down from the column and the number over, and that will give you an idea of where you are inside of the document. This is important for how Excel runs its functions. It uses this address is what it's called, which is a combination of a letter, which it always corresponds to the column, and the number, which always will correspond to the row of a given cell. You can quickly find out what cell you are in if you look at this name box over here in the side. That will always include the information of the address of the cell that is currently selected. So right now, I really want to touch base quickly on how you can navigate throughout the Excel sheet using just your keyboard. We'll talk a little bit later about why that's important. So whenever you need to move to the right in the Excel on the same row, you can use a tab. So if you hit tab, your selected cell will always move to the right. If you want to move back, you hit shift and tab, and it will bring the selected cell backwards. You can also use the arrow keys to do the same effect. If you hit shift and the arrow keys, instead of just moving, it will actually select the area that you are moving your cursor through, or your selected cell through. But getting back, so you tab and shift tab will let you move left and right inside of the document. Enter or return and shift enter will let you move up and down. So this is very useful if you are entering a lot of data into the document. Let's say if you were just entering random numbers, so I'm going to enter some random numbers, and you realize you made a mistake, you can just hit shift and enter and then go back up and make the correction that you need to make. And this is also true of tab if you are entering names or titles of columns across the field that you're working in. You can quickly hit shift tab and go back and rewrite the name to make sure that the formatting is how you want it to do. To go to the right, when you're done typing out the data you're inputting into the cell, you just hit tab instead of return, and you will go to the cell to the right of it. So that's very simple, quick navigation techniques in Excel. Are there any questions at this point before I move on?
We have no questions at the moment, Nick.
All right. So that's some basic information. The other thing that I do want to talk about is the way that Excel works. If you wanted to have multiple lines inside of a cell, you can hit Alt and return, and it will, what is called carriage return down. And and you can add multiple levels of text inside of a cell. So this is very useful if you're creating a document where you want to have a large area of a cell. When you do that, you will notice that the text will get truncated a little bit. One quick tip for Excel that is very useful, if you select an entire row and you double click, when the arrow select key moves to the bar with the arrow to either side, which is the resizing arrow for Excel, if you double click on that, that will automatically resize the cell to the largest contents. So it'll automatically fit all of the contents in the cell across the way. This is also true if you have words that are longer than the cell's width. When there's no data in the cell next to the cell that you've input data into, the text will be displayed across into the next cell content area. But if there's any data that is entered in it, you will get the data being truncated at the point where the cell width is. To correct that, you can just select on the width or this column that you want to work with, go to the width selector or the sizing arrow, and double click, and it will automatically fit the text into the cell, or rather fit the cell to the text that you have available. So these are some very basic tips on how to do some quick manipulation of text usage inside of Excel. The other thing to be aware of, if you do have a area of text on a area in a particular document, and you do want to get in to manipulate the data, there are three ways to do it. One is you have a formula bar at the top. You can click anywhere on the formula bar and go in and modify the data. The other way you can do it is you can double click on any part of the data that is displayed, and it will click into where you are currently trying to modify the data. The reason why this is important is if you do want to highlight or emphasize a particular piece of information inside of a cell, when you're modifying the text inside of the formula bar, it limits the amount of formatting you can do of text in it. But if you double click into a cell, you can actually highlight or format any particular aspect of it without having to format the entire cell. If you don't double click into it, when you make a formatting change, it will actually format the entire cell contents. Are there any questions at this point that I might want to address?
We have our first question coming from Tiffany. She writes, is the return key the same as the space key? And she writes in brackets, I'm on a PC.
Is the return key the same as the base key?
Backspace key, sorry.
Backspace key, no. The return key is enter on a PC, E-N-T-E-R. It's the one that has the kind of box with a little tab at the bottom shape on the right side of your keyboard. Please go ahead and let Clayton know if that is clarifies that question. Right. The other thing is, if you do have documents that have email or hyperlinks in them, Excel will automatically create a hyperlink out of what it finds to be a web address or an email address. If you do have lists with these email addresses in them and you need to make a mod, you can click on the formula bar and make that data. However, you cannot click on the cell. If you click on the cell, Microsoft will try to open up a web email browser or your whatever your web browser that you want to do, and go to that location. The way to edit the data inside of a cell that has the hyperlink, you can tell it's a hyperlink if it's blue colored with an underline underneath it, is you can use the F2 button on your keyboard If you're using a laptop, you might need to press the Fin or function button before you press the F2. But if you do have that F2, you press the F2 and it will go into the cell at the very farthest right section of the cell. This allows you to quickly modify an email address or a hyperlink that is inside of a document without accidentally opening something. So again, that's just an F2. Which will enter into the cell and it will go to the farthest right or the end of the cell, the last piece of information that is inside of the cell. So that's the way you can get into and modify cells that have hypertext in them without having to click on the formula bar. All right, before I move on, I think I saw another question pop in, if that's right, Clayton?
Nope, no questions at this time.
Okay, all right. So the other thing is pretty standard. I think most of you may have done it at one point or another. You do have a fill option in Excel. You can fill an entire row, obviously, by selecting the row and pressing the fill button, and it will fill that entire row. You can also fill what is called a range of cells in Excel. A range of cells is any area that covers more than one cell. We'll talk a little bit more about why that's important in a little bit. But so you can color those range of cells. If you do any activity in any Word or Excel or Microsoft product or most websites nowadays, and you want to undo what you have done, there are a couple ways you can do it. There's typically an undo button somewhere on the program, and for Excel, it's in the upper left, right next to the save icon. The other way you can do it is hitting Control-Z. If you want to redo something, you hit Control-Y. If you want to undo something, you hit Control-Z. Again, that's Control-Y and Control-Z to do and undo thing. It's very useful if you are working with a big set of data and you accidentally deleted a section, or if you're formatting for visual reasons, color of a document, and you want to redo or undo things. You can do that with Control-Z and Control-Y very quickly. Another thing about Excel, just so that you're all aware of it, Excel does have these cells, and right now you can see these little boxes. If you were to print this document, these little boxes would not be visible. And the way that you make those visible, obviously, is you select an area that you want to have borders, and there's this little drop-down menu here that allows you to select the type of borders you want to do. There's a lot of different ways to do that. Right now, I'm just going to select this option, which is all borders, and it will put up borders around everything. So when I do this, you will notice that there are some cells that don't seem to have a border. In this case, it is the G4 cell, the one that we wrote, hello all the people. The reason why it doesn't have a border is the text actually is crossing over the cell's boundary, and because of that, is showing that there's no border. If you widen the cell, it will obviously have a border come back. If you shrink down the cell, that border will disappear. If you double click, remember, on the center bar with the arrows to either side, will automatically resize the text. I'll do that again really quickly. You just select the row, double click on that border expanding option, and it will automatically reformat to the widest area. The reason why I wanted to talk about this really quickly is you can format a worksheet that you're sharing internally with your teams that is only going to be interacted with in Excel to not have that background cell structure. The way you do that is, and I'll redo this again really quickly, so I'll undo it and then redo it. You just select the area that you don't want these cell borders to be visible to the people who are using the sheet, and you can select the fill color option, and you fill color with white, and it will fill in all of that area with a white background. The only areas that you will see lines to denote where the cells are the cells that you have put a border in. So if you're making a form for distribution inside of your company, this is a very useful way to kind of format it so that people see it easily. The other thing to briefly mention here is that you can merge cells. When you merge cells, the cell content is split over multiple cells. This is usually done for formatting reasons. to make certain areas a little stand out a little bit more, or titles of sections inside of a document in Excel. To undo it, you just click the Merge and Center button again, and it will unmerge all of the cells that are selected. It will usually pick the cell from the farthest left to fill in if you click on Merge and Center, unless there is text inside of one of the cells. So if we go back, and then we do have data in 2 cells, when you do the Merge and Center, Excel will ask you that the upper left value will be the one that is kept throughout, and everything else will be erased. So if I click on OK here, the text "hello to all the people" is deleted when you merge. So just be aware of how that works. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. The other thing to be aware about when you have merged cells, really quickly, is the way Excel works is you cannot manipulate data through merged cells. What I mean by that is if there's a merged cell that covers multiple areas and you try to delete the text throughout an entire column, for example, and it goes across a merged cell, you'll get an error saying you cannot do that. So if you do need to manipulate a document that's already been created that has merged cells in it, before you do any manipulation, I would recommend you unmerge the cells first and then do whatever formatting manipulation you want to do, and then go back and re-merge the cells. That's just one of those random idiosyncrasies of Excel, as it is. So that's about the majority of what I'm going to talk about when it comes to formatting, the basic formatting, and how to manipulate data in Excel. I'm going to move on to actually more data entry, formulas, and filtering. Before I do, are there any questions at this point?
We have no more at this time right now.
All right, okay, so let's go ahead and get into the data entry section of this. So at the bottom, the way that Microsoft Excel works is you have a workbook, and inside of the workbook you have multiple worksheets. The worksheets are indicated down at the bottom of the workbook. So we had been working in our starting sheet, and we're going to go over to our data tab. And this is where we're going to talk about some of the tools and functions that you have inside of Excel to manipulate data. So this is just a list I pulled off of Wikipedia of presidents. And over on column D, I grabbed Microsoft stock prices going back to 2011 and just created a list here. We're going to kind of manipulate the data in these, and we're going to talk about hiding and unhiding cells and some of the pitfalls that are in how you format numbers when you're doing large area summing. So we'll get to that in a second. But first, I want to talk a little bit about one of the niftier features inside of Excel when it comes to data manipulation. So we're going to go to the Data tab in the ribbon. Inside the Data tab, there are a couple of options here that I want to talk about. One is sorting, and then we're going to talk a little bit about filtering. So just to quickly talk about the way that sorting works, if you select a column or an area of your data, and you click on the A to Z or Z to A icons, these are the sort icons, it will sort. But Microsoft has made Excel a little bit smarter. They've expanded the way that the machine coding in the background works. And so it will let you know if there is data around the cells that you are sorting. It will ask you, do you want to just sort the area that you've selected? Or because Microsoft has noticed that there is data around it, do you want to expand that selection out? Typically, if you're working with a long list that is in chronological order or has more data around it, the best option is to go with the expand selection. But if, for example, you wanted to just manipulate a small portion of your data and didn't want to touch anything else, you can force it to just sort the area that you were working in. Obviously, this does not affect any of the cells that are nearby or around it. The difference between A to Z or Z to A to Z will sort letters in the alphabetical order from A to Z. Obviously, Z will go from Z to A. It will also sort numbers from the lowest to the highest is A to Z, or from the highest to the lowest is Z to A. Typically, when I interact with my sorting, I usually use the actual sort option here, which is the icon that has Z to A and A to Z in it. This will pull up a dialog box, and inside of the dialog box, there are some features I do want to quickly talk about. One is the data will be analyzed, and if Excel thinks that there is some type of a label that is put on the top of the range you have selected to sort, it will automatically check this little box that says my data has headers. You don't have to select it, but in general, if you do have labels on it, it is useful, especially if you have many different fields across which you are sorting. The reason why is inside of this dialog box, it will let you sort by a particular column. And if you have allowed the Excel program to recognize that there are headers, it will give you the options of what those headers are. So we can sort by the president, and then it will let you choose on the way you're going to sort. You can, we'll get into these other options here in a little bit, but you can, in addition to just the values, whatever the data that is in the Excel cell, you can also do it by color, the color of the font, and if there is any icons that are in the cell. You can sort by those. And then it'll give you the option of sorting from A to Z or Z to A. There are custom lists you can put in, but I don't want to touch on those today. So we're just going to go ahead and sort this list in its entirety from A to Z. And what that will do is it'll pull out all of the data, and it will sort across all of the columns, keeping the data that is in all of the corresponding columns in the same row associated with the value that is in the lead row that you have selected, in this case, president's names, and so it is alphabetized that way. I'm going to undo that really quickly and stop for a second, see if there are any questions at this point.
No questions at this point. Looking at chat and the question and answer panel.
All right, awesome. So moving on really quickly, the other option you have, it's very powerful inside of Excel, is the filter option. So you can just click on, you select the area of your worksheet that you're working with that you would like to filter the data through, and you just click on the filter. What that will do is it will take the headers at the very top of whatever the selection you have made. In this case, our selection starts with row 1, so it'll pick all of the data values that are in that first row, and it'll put this little triangle next to it. So if you click on that triangle, it will pop up a bunch of options. In the bottom section of this, it will actually list all of the values that are, or the data that is inside of those cells. By default, it is on to select all of the data in it. You can unselect that, and then you can go through and pick anybody you want to have, or any values that you want to just display, and it will filter all of the data down to those values only. If you want to undo what you have done, you click on the triangle. Here, you'll notice that it has changed its shape. It's more of a funnel now. If you click on the funnel instead of the triangle, you can click on the clear filter, and that will remove any type of filters you have put into your Excel sheet. The filters can be stacked. What I mean by that is if you wanted to filter multiple values across many different, second, I'm going to select just George Clayton really quickly because he has spanned a couple of presidents. You can then filter again inside of an existing filter. This will get a little bit confusing if you're working with a large data, you're not sure of which rows you're filtering or columns you're filtering by, but you can quickly go up to the top, and if you see these little filter icons, those are the sections that are being used to filter. So you can quickly just go ahead and clear those filters out at any time that you need to go back and see the whole data set you're working with. The other nifty thing about how this works, the filtering works, is it does allow you to then sort inside of the area you've already asked Excel to filter. So you can go ahead and sort by that particular area, and it will in the same way as the advanced sort function, it will sort across the entire filtered area. You can only have one section of a worksheet filtered at any one time. So just be aware that you can only use it in small sections if you're going to be manipulating your data. The other thing I want to quickly talk about, as I said earlier, when you're doing your sort, you can actually sort by colors. So we're going to go back a little bit into the formatting, and we're going to use something called conditional formatting. And now conditional formatting is a powerful tool inside of Excel that allows you to format a large area based on criteria that you set. So we're going to go ahead and click on our conditional formatting. And we're going to go to a highlight cell rules option, and we go down to duplicate value. And what that does is if there's any duplicate values, they will be highlighted in the form. So it's a very useful tool to use. I think I got ahead of myself a little bit. I'm going to go back really quickly. There's something else I wanted to show you about the data manipulation before I showed you about the conditional formatting, so I do apologize about that. What we're going to do is we're actually going to take the data that's in this column here. We're going to split it across two columns. We're going to use something called text to columns to achieve this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to insert a cell next to the vice president's names. And I'll tell you in a second why I'm doing that. I'm going to select the column that I want to have this data pulled out of, and I'm click on this text to columns button. It is going to pop up with a wizard. There are 3 steps of this wizard, and what it's going to do is it's going to look through all the data that's in the area that we have selected, and it's going to separate out text based on criteria that we tell Excel to use. There are 2 options. There's delimited and there's fixed width. Delimited means that there will be some type of the text or data that you will use to separate out into 2 columns, such as a comma or a tab or a space will be used, and Excel will look through the data that's inside of the selected range, and it will pick apart the data according to how you have specified it to be done. The other option is a fixed width, and that means that you just say, I want everything, say the first 3 characters to be kept and everything else to be stuck into a second column. That is how you are able to do that. In this case, we're going to use the delimited option. And we're actually going to use the delimiter, in this case, is going to be the front parentheses. What Excel will do is it will look through the data here in the bottom, the data preview, and what it will show you is what happens if this particular text to columns formula is run, how the data will come out. And so we're going to use that parentheses. We're going to go ahead and click next on this. And then it's going to ask you where you want the cells to be put. You can specify a new area anywhere in your document, and it'll take that column and separate it out, starting with the highest cell that you select. Or you can leave it as its default. The default for the text to columns will always be the data in the upper left of the area that you have selected to do your sorting. That is why I added that column D, so that when I did this expansion out, it would have area that it would not overwrite existing data. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Finish. And what this has done is it has separated out the dates from the vice presidents. And when I've done this, you'll notice that the conditional formatting that we had put in earlier that is going to find duplicates has gone through, and it has highlighted all of the names that are the same across the data set. So that's why the conditional formatting can be very useful, because it can quickly go through data and automatically sort out. If you have a list of people's names or attendees to an event, that is a quick way you can find any duplicates or duplicate entries that may have been put in place by accident. Getting back to the filtering we were talking about earlier, or the sorting, you can actually sort by the color. It will actually let you choose how to sort it. So if you choose to sort by the color, it will go through and it will reorganize the data so that all of the data, in this case, for the conditional formatting, if you remember, it's any duplicate data that is in the set will automatically be sorted out and the color will be pulled to the top. So if you do have a large data set that has a list of names or dates, and you want to find everybody who was working on a certain date or all the clients who attended an event at a certain date or all the prices that are exactly the same, you can use this type of method to quickly pull that up. Obviously, if you go in and you were to modify the data, the conditional formatting would come into effect, and because it's no longer duplicated, obviously the color that we have associated with that duplicate value will go away. We can click on the sorting. You will notice that it did not automatically sort that data out. Unfortunately, it has not gotten to the point where Microsoft will consistently format or actually sort data that you want. You have to go back and tell it to sort it again to make it work the way it wants. You want the data to be put out. Okay, are there any questions at this time before I move on?
We do have one. This one comes from Sarah Lynn. Sarah Lynn writes, why would the arrow to filter show up on the cells when I haven't clicked specifically to filter? And then in brackets you write, sometimes when I format a cell afterwards, that arrow appears on the cell, question mark.
So when you format a cell, the arrow appears on the cell. Are you talking about this up here at the top, this arrow? Or are you talking about, so for example, if you have a data set like this, Microsoft will look through and it will give this little green arrow in the upper left that appears occasionally. And if you select that cell contents, it'll come up with this little warning number. The reason why Excel does this is it's looking around and it want to make sure you're putting in the data the right way. If it sees something that is not like the data around it, so for example, if you're entering a list of dates and you formatted it to be all dates, and the next cell you enter just a regular number, Microsoft Excel will indicate that it thinks there's something not right and will put this little green arrow in with the little warning box. Most of the time, these don't really necessarily need to be, they're not like a big issue. It does help highlight how your formulas are working inside of a sheet. So it's good to at least be aware of them. You can always tell Excel to ignore if it does see a particular error, but it will only ignore it for the time that you're actually working in that sheet. Once you save it and reopen it, it will pop up again whenever Microsoft Excel opens. So Clayton, I think she might have gotten back. Was that her question?
Yes, she said, yes, that's that one.
Okay. Right. So we don't have a lot of time left. I do want to move on really quickly to talk about cell formatting and some of the pitfalls that you may have run across. So in Excel, you can hide columns and rows. You can see if a column or a row is hidden. If you notice at the top, you'll see the letters. They go A, B, C, D, E, and then suddenly H. If you see this gap in either the numbers or the column letters, that usually indicates that there is a hidden cell. To unhide cells, there's a couple of different ways to do it. The way that I have found to be the quickest way is you select across the columns on either side of it, the area that you're noticing the gap, you hit right, you right click using your alternate click option and go down to unhide. And when you click on the unhide button, it will open up the cells out. I need to undo my filtering. All right. And then go ahead and sort those numbers. So right now I have these two columns, E and G, and they're sitting here. And the reason why they're here, if you'll notice that these numbers are displaying exactly the same across the two. But if you look at the formula bar, you'll notice that column E, which is formatted as an accounting style, which automatically sets it to round to the nearest hundredths place, will display as 25.02. But the actual number inside of the formula is 0.0156. The reason why this is and can be a headache to a lot of people who use Excel a lot, we're going to use the sum function really quick. So you just type equals and then sum, and then you select the range that you want to sum, and then you get parentheses and it'll close. When you add that up, it comes out to this number, 704.30. But if you sum the cells that are on the G, column G, in the same way, it will come out with a different answer. And the reason why this happens is Excel, when it rounds for display purposes, it doesn't actually round the numbers inside the cells. So if you have a large enough data set with fractional pennies in it, or fractional time, and you do a sum function, it will display a sum value that is different than the sum if you actually had somebody with a pencil go through and total things up. Usually these are off by a penny, maybe 2 pennies. But if you have a large enough data set, it can be off by a number of dollars. So just be aware that when you format a row of data, that will limit how many decimal places it has. When you do your summation, the data will be different if you're using a sum function than if you were to total it out one at a time. The way you can get around this, if, for example, you are doing a monetary transaction and your policy is to round to the nearest cent, when you do provide a calculatable tab out in a document, instead of copying or using a formula to give you the numbers that you're going to display, you can use the round function. The round function, the way it works is it's similar to the sum function. You just type equals in your parentheses and you type round. There are different types of rounding. You can round down, which will round down to the nearest number you specify, the nearest decimal place you specify. Round up will round up. mRound will do something different. You can always find out what a function will do. When you start to type it, it will come down with this little drop-down menu in Excel. You can press the down arrow and it will let you choose it'll give you a little explanation of what that particular function will do. One of the things that I recently found out that saved me a lot of time is if you are looking at these functions and want to select one, instead of having to type out the name, if you just hit tab, Excel will auto-complete whatever that function is, so it can save a bit of time. Anyway, see, the way that round works is you take round, you select the cell you want to round, and then you tell it the number of digits. The number of digits in this case are referring to the number of decimal places. So if you press 2, it will come up with a number 250.02, and as I did in this column here, when you sum those values, these are all rounded values, it will come up with the actual sum if you were to total these values. So if that does ever occur to you, that might be a way to quickly get around it. We are quickly approaching the end of the hour time we have allocated today. So before I move on to the last little bit that I wanted to talk about very briefly, are there any questions or any particular aspects of what we've talked about so far that you would like me to refresh or focus in on?
It doesn't like we have any more at this time right now, Nick.
All right, okay. Then I'm going to go ahead and move on quickly to 2 things. First is an example of a worksheet that you may at one point need to hand out to employees. This particular worksheet is in the page layout view, which allows you to see how it would look when you print it out for distribution. There are a couple of things that we're going to do on this. The first one is if you do have a large area of data, for example, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see the entire sheet. You'll notice that there is a big section of white space at the bottom of the page. If that's not something that you want to have, you can select all of the rows or however many of the rows you want to. If you right-click on any of the grade section of the selected text, it'll come up with a formatting menu option. Inside of that, there is an option called row height. This will let you specify the row height of a particular area that you have selected. It is done in inches, so you can kind of guess a certain fraction of an inch you think that you want the row heights to be. Again, you can always hit Control-Z and undo it. I think if we use about 0.42 inches, that will fill up that page. Just so we're all clear, I guessed, I didn't really know that would work as well as it did, so I'm very happy it did. But that's how you can quickly fill a section out. The same thing can be done with the columns across the top. You can select and specify a particular column width if you want to. Again, this will pop up in inches, and so you can guess and play with it to find out. The other thing you can do is you can always just select a particular area of your document and modify the widths of the cells. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this particular document actually had to do with the data protection aspect of it. I do have a formula here in this particular form. It totals what is in this row here, all of the number of employees that are going through the particular aspects of this particular form. So what we can do really quickly is you could send this out to employees just like this, and they can go in and they can do data entry as they want, and it will automatically total the cells that are above it. And so the formula works. But one of the things that can happen is if you ever have done this, you send out a form to employees and they accidentally delete the formula, and suddenly the form no longer works. It can be problematic. The way that you can get around this is you can actually protect a sheet. So the way you protect a particular sheet is we're going to go to the Review tab really quickly. And on the Review tab in the upper right, there are these options for protecting sheets. And the first thing you need to do before you protect the sheet, if you are going to be sharing it and you want certain cells for data entry for your team, is you want to make sure that they're allowed to edit whatever ranges they should be allowed to edit. The way you can set that is in the right, there's this little thing, button. It has a pen and the little boxes. This allows users to edit ranges. We're going to go ahead and click on that. I've already set this document up so that we can quickly show what the protection looks like. And we're going to protect this one little section for the MedCal introduction portion of this. So we just click on New. When you do these type of protections for distribution inside of your company, I strongly recommend that when you protect an area of your worksheet for future reference, that you always name it. In this case, I'm just going to use the title for the section, Medi-Cal, and then click on OK. You can set a password for it, so certain people, administrators who are aware of it, can have a range password so that they can modify the range if necessary. If you're just going to distribute to your whole organization, it's not necessarily something you need to spend time on. You can actually set permissions as well, limiting what people can and cannot do inside of a particular cell. Oops, I forgot. If that does happen, just be aware that Excel does not like the minus sign. So if you do run across that, you can just try to avoid it. When you have named cells or named areas that are protected, you can see them really quickly. It tells you where those cells are. You can modify those at a later date as you will. You click on apply, click on OK. Once you have set the permissions and the areas and cells you do want people to have permissions, you can click on protect and share the workbook, which allows you to share it if you're using a SharePoint system, or what I more often than not do, I'll protect a sheet inside of a workbook or the workbook itself. You click on that option, it will give you what options you want to do. Typically, you're going to let people select the locked cells and unlocked cells, but it does protect the contents of the cells. It's default. You need to set a password. I'm just going to use the password test, T-E-S-T. I click on OK, and it will ask me to reconfirm that password, T-E-S-T. I click on OK. And now the document is protected. So the cells that I have specified that we can modify, we can modify. Cells that are not ones that I have specified that the end user can modify will come up with an error if they try to modify data. The reason why this is important is, if you remember, there's a formula down at the bottom. Because I protected this sheet, the end user who is using this can no longer delete that formula by accident. This is how you can quickly and easily share data this way throughout your organization. We are butting up against the end of our time here. So I will ask if there's any final questions. Otherwise, please look forward to the next email about our webinars. And if there are any particular topics you would like to cover, please let me know and we will cover those as it is available.
Nick, at this time, we don't have any other final questions.
All right. Well, thank you.
I spoke too soon. We have Tiffany saying thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Tiffany, and everybody else. I do appreciate your time today. I hope it was useful to you. Please, if you can provide any feedback, you can either send me an email. Again, my email is nick@coopertech.net. And I will be sending out the materials that I used in this webinar for your review later on. And if you do have any further questions, please let me know. And like I said again, any feedback is always welcome. So thank you very much. And I hope you guys all have a very pleasant day.